ought to be in pictures. You're wonderful to see. You ought to be in pictures.
Hello and welcome to Deep Dive Movie Reviews with my friend Steve Hackman and myself, James Marsh. This week we return to the MCU for Thor, Love and Thunder.
Hey, but before we begin, though, if you haven't already subscribed to Deep Dive Movie Reviews, it'd be a great favor to us if you went ahead and did that. Join us on this movie journey that we're on. And as we approach 1,000 subscribers, we'd really love for you to help add to the list as we get to that magic number 1,000. And remember, Deep Dive Movie Reviews does contain spoilers. So if you haven't seen Thor, Love and Thunder, you're going to hear all about it now. You've been warned.
Yeah. Okay. So this is the 29th official MCU movie, and it catches up with Thor, God of Thunder. After the events of Avengers Endgame, he's somewhat despondent. He's trying to reevaluate his priorities, where his place is in the world, and he's kind of tagged along with the Guardians of the Galaxy a little bit. And then there surfaces a new threat in the form of Gore the God Butcher, played here by Christian Bale, who is a once very devout religious follower from a distant planet who has witnessed his entire race die from extinction, from starvation. It looks like the last of which being his own daughter. And he realizes that the gods he had dedicated his life to have forsaken him. And at the same moment that he comes into possession of a weapon called the Necro Sword, he vows to take his vengeance and kill all the gods. This sword allows him to do that. He can kill gods with this sword, but it slowly saps his own power from him. And that sets him inevitably on a collision course with Thor and the other Asgardians. And that's kind of basically the plot.
Yeah. So James, when I saw Thor Ragnarok, I almost didn't go to see that at the cinema because, to be frank, I was getting a little bored with MCU films. I'm not the biggest MCU fan, although I am a fan going all the way back to 2008, Iron Man, Robert Downey, which I thought was one of the best superhero films ever made. But I thought it had gotten into a bit of a rut. It had taken itself too seriously. I found it was rehashing a lot of things. So when I saw Thor Ragnarok and Taika Waititi directing it, he just breathed in this wonderful mix of humor, of irony, of willing to be self-deprecating while still giving us this big scope God story. And so I came away from Ragnarok as one of my most rewatchable MCU movies. If I got nothing else to watch, let's watch Ragnarok for a little bit, because watching Chris Hemsworth slay bad guys to Led Zeppelin soundtracks is, you can't go wrong with that. You got Jeff Goldblum, you've got all these kind of really quirky characters. So I went into Thor, Love and Thunder. We got Taika Waititi back. I'm ready for this. And this film has Taika Waititi's voice all throughout it. Having said that, sometimes you can have too much of a good thing. And I just felt in this film, it starts to the humor rather and the self-reflection and the self-winks and the not taking yourself too seriously, rather than it supporting a really great story, it becomes the story itself. And once you venture into that, I started to feel like I'm watching not a Thor film, but a mockumentary about a Thor film. And this is where the film left me a little underwhelmed.
Yeah, I think it's fair to say that this is kind of really coming as close to self-parody as the MCU has ever become. We were just talking off camera a few minutes ago about sort of The Boys and shows like that, where it's kind of taking this sort of ironic look at superhero stories. And this movie is trying to do like all of that, because on the one hand, it's advancing the MCU, it's continuing to build this world and this universe and further these characters in interesting directions. It also, wants to have its cake and eat it and kind of poke fun at itself throughout, make gags, to carry the story, but also make gags at the expense of the characters and the settings and the ridiculousness of it all, while at the same time, and it's only implicitly stated until the very end of the movie in the credits, where it's actually trying to make some kind of commentary about how these characters have become idolized almost as gods themselves, and that ends up displeasing some of the actual gods. They're like, no, we are being overshadowed now by superheroes, and I'm not having any of that anymore. So it's trying, and then there's this whole story of sort of family and loss and grief and loss of faith and all of these kind of other things. So there's kind of so much going on that it does sort of by its very nature feel very kind of disjointed and loose, and it's not propped up by a particularly strong narrative through line. It's just, there's just, as I said at the beginning, there's just a bad guy who wants to kill Thor and everybody else like him, and that's essentially the plot.
Yeah, and I can appreciate that being the driving force, because at that initial scene where Christian Bale, and it is a great scene, I enjoyed, where what's it like for someone who has suffered so much and yet has remained faithful to their God despite the suffering, despite the trials, the tribulations, only to find their God mocking them, saying it was all for nothing. And when you die, you're just going to see blackness because you ain't going anywhere. There was, again, that cathartic feel when he grabbed that sword and shoved it up his throat, like, this is a family friendly review show, so we won't say the actual word that was on my lips there, but I thought that would be a narrative that would carry this story, that was strong enough. But in the end, it wasn't. Unlike Ragnarok, where you had Kate Blanchett's evil sister, there was much more of a narrative story which carried the whole plot from beginning all the way to the end, and it was linked with really strong characters in between. You had Idris Elba, you had Carl Urban, you have these really powerful characters that are part of the narrative that was part of Ragnarok. Whereas I felt that was lacking in this film. It really fell on Natalie Portman's pseudo Thor to kind of bring that up. And so it focused more on a love story that wasn't in Ragnarok. And I guess in a way, maybe that's another reason why I didn't care for this film as much, is I don't
have no heart in your dead inside?
I have no heart, and I just want to see Thor smash, not Thor kiss. No, I go to superhero movies. I don't go for a romantic film. There's films that I go for romance, and I don't resonate. I want other more colorful characters. I want the Jeff Goldblum characters. Natalie Portman's character is not colorful enough for me. She's Jane Foster. She's a nice lady who she got the hammer, so now she gets to do cool things. But there's nothing about her personality itself which is quirky enough for the Taika Waititi universe. You need that Jeff Goldblum eccentric character. You need the Hulk character. You need these different colorful characters to operate within Taika Waititi's universe in order for the story to really have the impact. And I thought that so much resting on Jane Foster, who is, and this is not a slight against Natalie Portman as an actress, it's more just on the character of Jane Foster. She's not that interesting. Sadly, she's dying of cancer. But again, there's just not enough oomph for the type of film that Thor strives to be.
Yeah, no, I think that's an incredibly fair point. I don't think the Jane Foster character, I don't think the kind of performance that Natalie Portman is capable of giving really aligns with Taika Waititi's tone and sensibility. Nor do I think a story about someone dying of cancer and having chemotherapy particularly gels smoothly alongside the goofiness of everything else, where one of the more engaging relationships is the relationship Thor is having with his axe because his axe is now getting jealous that Mjolnir, the hammer, has shown up again. I mean, it's stupid, but they get more mileage out of that. I don't have a problem per se with there being a sort of a romance in the story. You know, a lot of these motivations are driven by romance, and that's fine. And it's got love in the title, for goodness sake. You know, I knew that was going to be part of it, but it does feel so out of place because it's not the right movie to take that story as seriously as perhaps it should have been told. You know, I think there was a time, and there is a time and a place and a context in which Thor could have dealt with the fact that Jane Foster has cancer, and similar to how Gore the God Butcher can become powerful, but it will ultimately kill him. She can, you know, wield the hammer, become the mighty Thor, but it's going to kind of hide her cancer. Yeah. But it's ultimately going to exacerbate her health and kill her off. I think that there's a quite powerful dramatic story to be told there, but I don't think this movie has any interest in telling it beyond the most kind of cursory manner. If it can't poke fun at it, then it's not interested.
And that's where the right director for the right movie comes into play, because Kenneth Branagh directed the first Thor film. And the film that you described would have been better directed by Kenneth Branagh, who is better at bringing that dramatic sensibility into his film, but he doesn't do as well with the quirky Taika Waititi world. If anything, I enjoyed Ragnarok more than I enjoyed the first Thor film. I love both directors. I love Kenneth Branagh. I love Taika Waititi, but they make two completely different styles of films. And you've got to have the right director making the right film. Otherwise, it doesn't give you the full return. And I think by and large, a lot of people feel the same way. They enjoyed this film, but they realized it didn't measure up to Ragnarok because it's trying to do something that's kind of outside the scope of what Taika Waititi does well. And so he doubled downs almost too much on the things he does well in this. And again, then I start to feel like I'm watching Saturday Night Live doing a sketch with Chris Hemsworth as the guest host, and they're doing Thor. Like, I feel like I'm watching an SNL sketch rather than the film itself, because like they say, when the news in the Onion article becomes the reality, something's gone off the rails. And when your movie starts to look like the sketch that Chris Hemsworth would have done as a guest host on Saturday Night Live, you know that something's gone wrong.
Yeah, no, I mean, I said earlier that this felt like Thor as Panto. I don't know if you know Panto as an American, but it's a very British thing of a kind of normally a fairy tale or a children's story done on stage with an interactive audience and lots of larger than life characters, but it's completely silly and over the top. This feels like
it gives heterosexual males a chance to dress in drag,
dress up as old ladies, basically. This is like they made an entire movie out of Matt Damon and Hemsworth's brother and Sam Neill, who do that kind of play within a play in the movie, recounting the exploits and triumphs of Loki, who show up again in this movie, essentially to retell the story of Ragnarok. It feels like that became a movie, and so it's. I think a lot of the silliness of the film actually does work. I think for me, it was very funny. And quite consistently throughout. But then whenever it tries to tell something more serious, particularly ill-served is the Jane Foster side of the story, I think. It falls down because it needed a dramatic shift in tone to service that story well. And it doesn't do that. So it ends up kind of belittling it. And when you are dealing with issues like chemo and cancer, terminal cancer at that, spoilers, this is not the way to tell that story.
No.
And so you end up with something that is very disjointed. That being said, when it's being silly, it does silly very, very well.
As 2 hours of running gags, it's a funny, again, if I want to watch a Saturday Night Live sketch for its humor and its running gags, great. That's it. But as a film narrative, it lost its true north somewhere along the line.
Yeah, I mean, it feels like this film is something of a victim to the whole Phase 4 itis that MCU seems to be sort of working through at the moment. It spent so much of its time. Phase 1 was Phase 1. It was like, let's just introduce these characters and then get them to the Avengers, team them up at the end. But then since then, they've been putting into play this the whole Infinity War thing, which lasted 2 complete phases and involved so many characters, so much world building and interaction, that by the time you got to the end and you kill off half the cast and then bring them all back again, you've done so much and accomplished so much that inevitably there's this feeling of, well, now what? After that? And I think what they have done, on the one hand, they've used it as an opportunity to introduce some new characters. You've got Shang-Chi, you've got the Eternals, you've got characters like that. They've also used it as an opportunity to allow auteurs with a very distinctive directorial voice to play in their sandbox and essentially make the movie that they want to, in a way that they weren't letting directors do beforehand. If you've got to remember that way back in the early days of the MCU, directors like Edgar Wright, Patty Jenkins were linked to movies and then dropped out. There are more as well, because there was this lack of creative control afforded them. That is clearly no longer the case, or at least the apron strings are far longer now. Right. So you get a movie like Shang-Chi, which is a martial art, a Chinese martial arts movie first and foremost. You get the Eternals, which is a Chloe Zhao movie, however you look at it. If you've seen Nomadland or any of her other movies, you can see her fingerprints all over that. You look at Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness. That's Sam Raimi making kind of like the biggest, craziest Evil Dead sequel, but it's a Doctor Strange movie. They've never felt more like part of the filmography of their directors than they do now. And so this very much feels like a Taika Waititi movie. But, in terms of building an overarching narrative towards a greater purpose, we are none the wiser as to where this is all going. And so inevitably it all just feels a bit like the wheels are coming off somewhat.
No, and the thing is, when these movies don't quite achieve, if you're going to err, I would rather err on the side of giving them more creativity, because if anything, I was bored with some Phase 2, Phase 3 MCU films. I was not bored in this movie. There was no boring element in this film. If I had a boring element, I thought anytime they rely too much on the CGI spider shadow creatures, that for me, it just becomes a cartoon for me. Whereas, again, while I thought Ragnarok worked a little better than Love and Thunder, is because in addition to Cate Blanchett, you had her actually in Asgard, and you had her corrupting people like Karl Urban. Like he's not a shadow figure. He's not a CGI created. He's an Asgardian who has to make a moral decision about, do I go with the way the winds are blowing in Asgard, or do I stand up for truth and justice? And you watching different people in Asgard have to make this moral decision, whether you bend with Nazi Germany coming in, or do you stand up and be the resistance? Whereas in this film, you essentially just have Christian Bale with his CGI army, which is far less interesting than, and that's not to say that the Christian Bale character wasn't good. I thought that kind of worked, but it just wasn't enough. It wasn't in a place that we care about. It wasn't in Asgard. He was often in trans-dimensional areas, and we had to go looking for him in wherever the gods are, which lowers the stake. In Ragnarok, we felt, oh my God, all of Asgard is under threat. Little do we know, in Love and Thunder, Asgard just relocates to be a tourist community somewhere in Norway or something.
Yeah, it's just a quaint tourist spot.
And again, it takes away, like, is this really a godly realm, or is this just a marketing? One of the criticisms if I have of this film is everything is lessened in this movie. Like, even the gods are what makes them not superheroes, because obviously if you can just kill one with a sword, were they really gods to begin with? Zeus gets killed pretty quick, although we see in the end credits that he makes a comeback. And maybe this leads into, what did you think of Russell Crowe?
I thought Russell Crowe was a lot of fun, actually.
Yeah.
You know, I liked his little tennis skirt and, you know, dancing around the way he did. You know, it is interesting what you were saying about the gods and the depiction of the gods and how they are kind of undermined, and even is it called Olympian City or wherever they go, where they are kind of put up on their pedestal and ridiculed somewhat by the movie. And I think if you're going to give the movie the benefit of the doubt, you can say, well, that kind of is, in a nutshell, the dilemma that Thor himself is facing, that, you know, the time when being a god makes you all powerful is over, and or that you're only as powerful as your followers make you, you know, and in a time when we are losing faith, you know, as a race, then inevitably the knock-on effect of that is that the gods become less powerful. And maybe that's what Russell Crowe's Zeus is tapping into in his post-credit sequence, when he's like, you know, we're losing power because people don't believe in us anymore. And we are kind of seen as inherently somewhat silly. And we need to kind of readdress the balance. And so we see that he sends his son, or half son, Hercules, down, played by Brett Goldstein from Ted Lasso, which I think is going to be interesting. So there's that. Similarly, I thought Christian Bale, I thought he was great. I mean, he's always great. You know, he always is going to put in 110%. I thought he was kind of pretty awesome. And he's talked about how he's referencing and channeling Nosferatu and Aphex Twin's Come to Daddy video, which is one of the most terrifying music videos ever. But for me, he also reminded me of the child catcher in Chitty Chitty Bang Bang.
Oh yes,
you know, more because of what he does than anything. You know, there's a kind of Pied Piper of Hamelin thing going on where he just wait. Audience.
James has just made his clever and not so sly allusion to James Bond. He's
Chitty Chitty Bang Bang.
Connect the dots. There we go.
You know, where he literally rides into Asgard with this wagon that he then sort of, you know, chucks all the kids on. But then, yeah, in terms of a threat, he steals the kids and then goes and sits on this desolate rock, kind of waiting to be attacked or something, you know. So it looks cool when they do have their big final showdown, but what does it all mean? And does it really amount to much of a threat? Not so much.
No.
But you get the idea that this is a film that was kind of made on the fly and, you know, largely improvised. And in a way, you're kind of like, well, great that they got the opportunity to do this with such a big sandbox, with so much money. But at the same time, that's why it might feel a little bit kind of loose and incoherent and insubstantial at times, because at the end of the day, I think it is. It's a light show. It's a puppet show. It's It's not much. There's not much meat on those bones, I don't think.
You know, the funny thing is, I didn't know Christian Bale was in this film. And so in that beginning scene, you know, and he's under a lot of makeup and prosthetics. And when he starts speaking, the Rolodex in my mind, if you could see it, it took about 3 seconds for me to see you know, Christian Bale has a very distinct vocal delivery. And it spoke right through the prosthetics and the makeup. And I was like, oh wait, who is this guy? Christian Bale's in this. I didn't know that Christian Bale was going to be the villain. And then I was all set up for this. This is going to be a great movie. And this is why, another reason why it left me a little underwhelmed. Expectations mean a lot in films. And again, I'm a big Taika Waititi fan. You know, What We Do in the Shadows, his style of comedy, I love again what he does with Ragnarok. Right from the get-go, we see Christian Bale. I mean, I'm all set for this. And then it was just kind of 2 hours of running gags. And I felt like I had been at a very long stand-up comedy routine where somebody was, you know,
improv night or something.
Yeah, it was improv night, and which is fun, but maybe not what my original expectation was.
Yeah, no, I think that's fair. I think some people did quite well out of it. I think Tessa Thompson seems to click with his material pretty well. You know, she was a great sort of breakout in Ragnarok, and I think she she handles the material quite well, certainly better than Natalie Portman does,
Mhm.
which is no real slight to Natalie Portman. She's just a different kind of performer with a different kind of story to tell.
She's a Black Swan actress. She's not a Thor Love and Thunder actress.
And I love her dearly, always have. When Leon came out, The Professional, as Americans know it, in like 94, I was like 16, 17, and I was like, this is amazing. This is a great movie, and I followed her ever since. But here, she's fine, and her story just feels a little bit out of place, or out of step with the rest of the movie somewhat. But you've got to give a shout out to the use of Guns N' Roses in this movie, which is every bit as good as the use of Led Zeppelin in Ragnarok. And I counted 4 Guns N' Roses songs in this movie, and I was like, whoever was the music sort of consultant had the easiest job in the world on this movie. Whenever they're asked, what should we use for this scene? More Guns N' Roses, I guess.
More Guns N' Roses. Hey, we got the license. Just use it. We'll save some money by using, we obviously they got a deal, buy 4, get the 5th one free or whatever.
And there's even a character who calls himself Axel.
I was just going there, and they actually do a whole routine gag with the name Axel. Mm-hmm. And I'm thinking, wow, there's either Taika Waititi or somebody in the production team is a huge Guns N' Roses fan.
But it just fits the tone of the movie perfect. I mean, this is so 80s, and so sort of boldly, unashamedly celebratory about the 80s. And it feels, and I want to phrase this in the best possible way, but it feels quite gay, this movie as well, or quite queer friendly. There's maybe it's just the rainbow palette of it all, and I think there is a kind of suggestion that Valkyrie's character is gay or whatever, and Korg, the whole Korg story about how what are they called, Cronins or whatever they're called, that's when two guys get together and they hot touch fingers or something in a cave, or that kind of the way that those kind of stories were handled in the movie. I was just like, this I can get behind. This feels like a pride movie almost.
Well, when they were in
Olympia, in the best possible way,
when they were in Olympus, that was, I mean, even Russell Crowe's Zeus, you felt there was a little sugar in that tank as well. It made me think of, again, I keep coming back to Saturday Night Live, but when I was watching the whole Olympus scene, there was a famous sketch with Justin Timberlake when he was guest hosting, where he plays Caligula. And he's got, and basically it's the tales of sober Caligula, where he's trying to do right, and yet there's all this debauchery all around him. And I just kept getting that whole scene during the whole Olympus, to the point where even when Chris Hemsworth is kind of stripped naked, and the illusion is it's not just the girls in that crowd. Everybody enjoyed that, and so it was definitely a very rainbow scene.
Yeah, and I appreciate that kind of, positivity on screen.
Sure.
There's no, I mean, not to suggest, we should feel otherwise at all, but no, just it was a very welcome take on sexuality and gender and everything. I was just like, this has got the right sensibility about all of that.
You just know that Olympus is not guided by American puritanical evangelical moral structures.
Well, as they keep talking about, it's like it's all about the orgy, right?
Yeah, that's right. It's you're not going to be invited if you
not
don't
coming
keep
to the orgy. And can we talk about Russell Crowe's accent just for a second? I mean,
there was like a Greek island restaurant owner. That's what it sounded like.
Yeah, he was. I mean, there's a character, a sketch character that a British comedian called Harry Enfield, who I think most people know. One of his first characters that he used to do way back in the 80s was a kind of kebab shop owner called Stavros, and he just sounded a little bit like this, and it was exactly what Russell Crowe's Zeus reminded me of.
Well, it looks like Russell Crowe's had a few kebabs lately.
Yeah, he's enjoyed his lockdown for sure.
He's enjoyed his lockdown. That's a good way of looking at it. Just following up on a point you made earlier about the use of 80s, Guns N' Roses. I've said this before. I feel like being 55 years old, I'm in the golden era of films that resonate with my sensibilities, because the big filmmakers now are all my age. Taika Waititi, you know, these guys are all within a spectrum of my age, you know, the J.J. Abrams and the Kenneth Branaghs, and I could go on and on. So I love when, you know, J.J. Abrams, he loves to use Beastie Boys, Sabotage in his Star Trek films, you know, and, you know, using Led Zeppelin and Ragnarok. And I could go on and on of the times where there'll be kind of a shout out to something that really resonates with somebody who's of my age. And then I just have to think of who the director is. And I'm thinking, well, of course, because we grew up at the same time. I love listening to the Rob Lowe's podcast because that guy, he is such a nostalgia buff. He'll pull out commercials from the 1970s with talking about with a guest. And I'm thinking, I know that commercial. So again, I'm in the sweet spot of the things in film, whether they use soundtracks in a certain way, or they'll bring in a guest, you know, or thinking, oh, now I'm a big director, I can get in anybody. I'll bring one of my childhood heroes. I'll bring in a ex-Star Trek, you know, person to do a walk, something like that. And so that's why I enjoy films like this, because you're thinking, yeah, of course, somebody in their 50s making a movie is going to do a Guns N' Roses soundtrack.
And why shouldn't they? And why shouldn't they?
When you've made it, do your vision.
Exactly.
Your vision.
You know, when you get the opportunity to do a movie like this, where clearly he had carte blanche to do whatever he wanted, you better do whatever you want, because you're not going to get this opportunity again. There
is no safety belts in this movie for Taika Waititi. You're right. He had carte blanche. And again, what made this film not what it could have been was I would have loved a different type of story, not one that centered on love and cancer and chemotherapy. You know, something that's more what we do in the shadows, where we can just be silly from beginning to end, and that's part of the narrative without suddenly jumping into something super serious. And then we'll do a silly, stupid gag. And it's that dissidence which didn't quite gel for me.
So on that note, I think it's time to score this bad boy.
I think so. What should we use? Hammers
or jealous stormbreakers, or
Hemsworth backsides?
yeah, we could use, yes, because we already had America's ass with Captain America, right? So this is just sort of Asgardian ass, I guess.
How many Asgardian asses would Hemsworth?
Sure, why not?
Yeah, James, I think from what I've shared up to this point, this film didn't quite measure up to the standards and expectations I had gone into hoping for. It was more, it never, the sum of its parts was never as good as the individual gags running through it. So I'm going to be a little harsh on this one, mainly because my expectations were, you know, cut off at the ankles, so to speak. So I'm going to give Thor: Love and Thunder 2.5 stars out of 5. This is not something that you need to run off and see in the cinema. Catch it on streaming, because it's more like a 2-hour running gag, and it is funny, but it's not something you necessarily have to see on the big screen.
Interesting. Okay. I mean, I kind of agree with a lot of what you were saying. I think we were sort of, for the most part, on the same page. This is sort of baggy and excessive, and at times sort of poorly thought out, you know, and lacks a certain sort of gravitas or depth to much of it. And I think at the moments when it does attempt to go deep, it's kind of, to use your expression, cut off at the ankles, because it just feels tonally sort of unbalanced at times. That said, I had a really good time watching it. I did enjoy myself. It's not half the movie that Thor Ragnarok is, but then I'm on completely the same page as you with that I think it's one of the best, certainly one of the best of the sort of more recent MCU movies. I thought that was just pitched perfectly. However, I did have a lot of fun with this one, and I like the cast. And although one or two people, you know, were kind of out of place, they weren't miscast. It was just that this wasn't the right time to tell their stories, I think. I will disagree with you on one point. I think if you're going to watch this do go see it in the cinema.
Mhm.
I was fortunate enough to see this in the IMAX cinema, where some of those big CGI sequences were reframed for the IMAX aspect ratio, and it looks great. And like I said, it's a big Technicolor rainbow of adventure. And so I think that's where it is going to be given the best opportunity to do what it wants to do. But it's not. I don't think this is going to end up being a particularly vital, chapter in the MCU. I don't feel like it's taking many great leaps forward in terms of the overarching story, wherever that's going. And so I will give this a rock solid, very firmly worked 3 Asgardian asses out of 5. Because I don't give halves.
Yeah.
But I think, I think this is in some regards, it's the MCU on kind of autopilot a little bit, but at the same time, it's allowing Taika Waititi to absolutely make a Taika Waititi movie on the biggest possible canvas, and you can't really fault him for doing that.
Fair enough. 3 and a 2.5, 2.75 overall.
There you go. It's more than half. It's more than half.
More than half. Hey, that's what James and I think, but what do you think? Go ahead and leave your comments in the comment box below. We'd love to know what your perspective is on Thor, Love and Thunder. Also, James and I are on social media. If you want to follow us on Instagram or Twitter, you'll find the details and links for that below. James?
That's right. Have a look at some of our other videos. We've got a few other MCU ones, definitely the last Doctor Strange. We got the Eternals. Did we do Shang-Chi? I'm not sure if we did.
We didn't do Shang-Chi.
Right. So we've got a couple of other ones. Maybe, who knows, one day in the fullness of time, we will circle back and do them all. Who knows? Making promises I can't keep now. In the meantime, have a look at our other videos. We've got our Every Best Picture series as well, some top 5s, some top 10s. Let us know if you'd like to see us review something in particular going forward. We do take requests on occasion. And in the meantime, that's it.
Till next episode.
Goodbye.
You're wonderful to see. You ought to be in pictures. Oh, what a hit you would be.